this new escalation between Iran and Israel. Israelis attack Iranian consulate in Syria. In the Strait of Hormuz, Iran has seized an Israeli ship. And right after that, we had this attack on Israel from Iranian. What's your take on this complexity that we're having right now?
Well, I think there's a desire to simplify it, particularly in Western media, American media, make it just simply Israel and Iran, and the U.S. is stepping in to try and be the good guy, the good cop, or however you want to describe it. And it's much more complex than that. And Ken Klippenstein in The Intercept, he laid this out pretty well. He had an article about how there are 16 nations involved in this. And when you look at the way that Klippenstein lays it out, or the way that most people understand it, folks who are watching this show, as most of you all understand it, you see it is a great big web. A lot of this has to do with the U.S. military, a presence in the region, the footprint of the empire, how it touches everything. So some of it has to do with the distance, say, between Israel and Iran. Some of it has to do with the fact that this gets into what's happening currently in Gaza. It gets into what has happened historically to Palestine, but also to Lebanon. You can't get away from what occurred during the Syrian civil war, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it is incredibly complex. It's I think that the point about that is that when you have so many actors in it, it can make things very unpredictable, and it can make things become much more dangerous very rapidly. And I think that's the fear here, as well as to that the idea of where this could go to. Certainly the idea that, we always have to remember there are both Russian and American troops in Syria. And Syria is one of those nations that is part of this complex web that is girding this current conflict between Israel and Iran.
And when it comes to this attack of Iran and Israel, do you think we haven't seen such a thing for a long time? I don't remember Iran attacking directly Israel. What was the necessity of Iran doing this right now, in your opinion? Why they did that?
Well, I think there was the need for a retaliatory attack following Israel's attack on Iran's consulate in Damascus. And we just talked about before how the American media, the Western media, wants this much, a lot simpler. If you were to watch American media, and I'll bet that it's the same for those of you who are in Europe or other parts of the Western world, the idea that you could very simply and accurately describe what happened over the weekend as a retaliatory attack just by inserting that word in retaliatory, not take up too much more column space, and it would be accurate, and it would be concise, and it would be definitive in terms of helping your audience and your readers understand what occurred there. You can go through U.S. newspaper after newspaper, and you will not find those words. In the Wall Street Journal, it took me, I think, 10 paragraphs to get to the point where they mention this Iranian attack the Israeli attack on Iran's consulate in Damascus, on April 1st, let alone any of the other aspects. Certainly on the context, you would think that this was just a out of the blue type of attack. And you see the phrasing used by the U.S. government surrogates on television, they're the apologists for the empire all throughout cable news and things like that. It matches up with what the members of Congress are saying, that this is an unjustified or unprovoked attack on Israel by Iran, again, as if it just occurred out of the blue. And certainly not referencing the history involved here, but also not referencing the immediate act, a really unprecedented act in the sense of that attack by Israel on Iran's consulate, like the clear violation of international law, the brazenness of that, and the fact then that there were attempts by Iran to find a diplomatic resolution to that attack. And you'll see this in the Iranian messaging that, after 10 days, we couldn't do anything else. What did you expect us to do? basically, to paraphrase, right? After 10 days, nothing came of this clear violation of international law. The UN didn't take it up. It was ignored. And so we had to act. And I think it's important, as we discuss this, to see the limits that Iran put on its retaliatory attack. This was really a demonstration. It was a cautionary note that was being sounded. The Iranians gave 3 days notice about this attack. They started telling people about the attack, I guess, on Thursday. An attack was on, Saturday night, U.S. time. And so, as well, then the fact that one of those that was told, they explained this to, was the Americans. And then not only did they do that, but when they launched the missiles and the drones, they gave plenty of notice, right? And those drones took 7-8 hours to reach Israel, and there were 7 or 8 hours of notice that the drones were in the air. So to look at this as anything other than an attempt by the Iranians to be heard, I mean, because they knew full well, they understood the how well the Israeli air defense munitions or the Israeli air defense systems work. They've seen, of course, how those systems have worked. Similar systems have worked, but including those against their own drones in Ukraine for the last 2 years. So they knew that they had, that this attack would cause very limited damage and likely few casualties. And thankfully it did. One young girl was severely hurt, it seems. But other than that, no one seemed to have been hurt. And, almost all the cruise missiles and drones were shot down as to be expected. The hypersonic missiles got through. And that's a very important point to make, as well as the fact that all the cruise missiles and drones were shot down, not for the point that this is some great Israeli victory, but for the point that, one, Israel had to expend a ton of their air defense munitions, which are expensive and costly and timely to produce, but also as well the fact that Iran was willing to waste 300 of theirs, 300 of their cruise missiles and drones. We've got enough of these, we can waste them, right? And I think that's where the point was you're starting to really get at, is like Iran was saying, look, we can do this. We're going to show you, can we do this? Here's a demonstration. You're going to be able to shoot everything we have down, but you know what? We're just showing you that we can send as many of these as we want, and we eventually will overwhelm and exhaust your air defense systems. And what you're not going to be able to shoot down are our hypersonics. So we're going to show the entire world how well your defenses work against those missiles. They don't. So then the other aspect then is also too what the Iranians have said. I think there's one other point after this, is that the Iranians have also said to the Gulf monarchies, who, from where the U.S. has its aircraft and its air defense batteries and its military based. We did not attack you. We did not attack you, the Iranian foreign minister said. But the way he said it, just, we did not attack you yet. He didn't say yet, but that was there. Right. So putting them on notice of, do you really want to get into a regional war here? Do you really want to get into do you want our hypersonics entering into your countries? And then the other aspect of this, again, it's very important, is the idea that the Iranians said very clearly, this concludes it. We view the matter as done. This does not have to go any further. And I think that's an incredibly important point that is missing from a lot of American commentary, or Western commentary as well, probably, that the Iranians have said very clearly that this can end right here. If you watch the American channels, what the American news press are saying, what the politicians are saying here in the U.S., there's no mention of that, or very little mention of that. It's all breathless anticipation of what is Israel going to do next. Right. So there's, if there is an ability to manifest something coming out of the United States, it would be more war. It certainly wouldn't be the conclusion of hostilities in this latest round that are right at hand if these countries want to take it.
Do you think that at the end of the day, when it comes to the cost and benefit of these type of activities on the part of Israelis, do they really consider that the further escalations in this conflict would not be beneficial for them, or they're gonna attack Iran?
I think it's going to come down to what their political calculations are, right? They certainly have the very key part of that calculation in terms of their decision making that the Americans are going to back them no matter what. They also know that the Americans will be okay with Israel striking Iran and determining it as defensive, right? So the Americans have said we're not going to support, supposedly have said we're not going to support any offensive attacks by Israel against Iran. That does not mean they won't support any attacks by Israel against Iran. I mean, you see this continually in terms of American foreign policy justifications. You know, take for example, with the way that administration after administration, be they Republican or Democrat, say the War Powers Act does not apply because they'll determine everything as self-defense. Okay, so everything that's been happening, say in the Red Sea for the last 5 months, 6 months, according to the United States government, is all defensive. So even when our warplanes are bombing into Yemen, they declare that as defensive. So the same type of logic, the same type of legal arguments would be made to justify why the United States is supporting Israel if Israel attacks Iran. So I'm not really comforted by this supposed condition by the U.S. that they will not support Iran. And then you also have a politician and executive official after politician after executive official who have said, ironclad, that seems to be the word that they're using in Washington, D.C. Our relationship with Israel, our commitment to their defense is ironclad. Today, I heard the spokesperson of the State Department, Matt Miller, describe it as sacrosanct. Right. So now there's a religious element to it as well. Right. There's a religious bond. There's a holy bond between the U.S. and Israel as well. So, I mean, certainly you take that into account and you could see how Israel could lean towards we are going to retaliate and we're going to escalate this. It will be, I think the calculation is that will they have enough air defense munitions to hold up against the Iranians? And I don't know. Certainly, the Iranians can produce missiles and drones a lot faster than the Israelis and Americans can produce air defense munitions. And so you get into that calculation of at what point does that occur where the Israeli systems are overwhelmed? And do the Israelis believe that they will never get to that point, that they can manage this, that the Iranians will back down, that the Israelis can knock out their command and control on the Iranian side so that their Iranian attacks just aren't very effective, that the Americans will come in and support them so they'll not just have their own firepower, but American firepower, that more Arab nations will fall in line with Israel, then will be supportive of Iran, whether that's passively or actively. We saw that happen this weekend, where the Jordanians were shooting down Iranian missiles and drones, claiming it was to defend their own airspace and claiming to defend their own population. When the reality is that the things they were shooting down were falling down amongst the Jordanian population and putting them at risk. But the Jordanians obviously made the decision that it's better for us to shoot these things down in defense of Israel, keeping good favor of the Americans, not cause problems with Israelis, than to be aligned with Iran. So, I mean, you have all these different calculations, but then it comes back down to like, okay, how's the public going to view this? And does this give us any kind of political benefit to continue to escalate this, right? Even if it's not the entire public, but is this what we need, particularly say in Israel, particularly for this government, right? This right-wing government on Netanyahu, is this what we need to consider to continue the emergency going forward so that there won't be elections, so that we won't be removed from power? Remember, 71% or something like that of Israelis think that Netanyahu should resign. His coalition partners, those right-wing parties run by Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, they're going to lose their seats. Right. So how do they keep their hold in power? How do they keep their place in power going? Okay, the Gaza thing is maybe it's now starting to sputter out, or at best, you're going to do Rafah, and that's going to last for maybe 4 to 6 weeks, but you're going to lose that justification. Okay, so maybe it's this an invasion into Lebanon that keeps us in power, that keeps the emergency going. But that's going to be costly. And by the way, how did our last 2 invasions of Lebanon go? Right? So maybe it's this type of thing where it's just this tit for tat air and missile and drone attacks between the two countries, that yeah, I mean the costs aren't so great, right? In the sense that we can manage that as long as it doesn't get too far where the Iranians don't overwhelm us. And maybe the Iranians are making the same calculations. This is what I think the Israelis are thinking. Maybe the Iranians are making the same calculations, that they don't want to push it too far where they now are actually in a full-scale war with us. So they want to bluff up to a line and continue to attack us, but in a managed way. And of course, I think everyone who's watching is the same opinion as you and I are, is you can't manage these things. Sometimes you might get away with it, but the overall reality of warfare is that it's not manageable. It's a superhuman force, right? It is beyond, and it often makes those who think they can make war their agent, war often makes them its agent, right? So I mean, this is why understanding the not just the histories but the philosophies of these things, right? The sciences of these things, right? The natural sciences, if you will. War is not, I mean, so anyway, but I know that's a very long answer, but I think those are the thoughts that are running through the Israelis right now as they decide to respond. And of course, it will be the most what is best politically for us domestically, what is best domestically politically for us will be the most important calculation, or most important figure in their calculations.
If they decide to attack Iran, how do you see the policy on the part of the Biden administration?
I think they're going to support them. They're going to claim that this is the defensive strike, that this is a retaliatory strike. They're going to, provide what they can in terms of, as they have been doing. So I really don't think that you're going to see anything different. I think if Israel strikes at Iran, you're just going to see a continuation of American policies. Well, it has done, certainly it has done in the sense now Speaker Johnson says next week they're going to vote on a bill for Israeli aid. Whether or not it's going to be that bill that also includes the Ukraine aid, I'm not sure. I haven't seen anything more on that. But, at the very least, Israel is looking to get another $14 billion out of this, right? I mean, so it also, I think, is helpful for the Americans because this takes time and attention away from Gaza, right? And this brings it back to a very simple binary struggle, right? This is a question of the Israelis being attacked by the Iranians. And so then that falls into all the tropes and all the inaccuracies and all the stupidities of not just American foreign policy, but of American society and culture, right? So how many right now, including members of Congress, if you went up and asked them about what the Iranians did, they would say something along the lines of, well, what do you expect from those Arabs, right? I mean, they don't, people, I would bet that a good percentage of the members of the American Congress do not know that are Iranians or Persians, right? As opposed to, I mean, I think, I mean, so, I think what you're going to see is this continuation of American policy as we have seen it already, as we've watched the U.S. fully support this genocide in Gaza. But we're also going to see where other opportunities come up. And you've also seen that already in terms of attacking Biden. Right. So I think that's another pressure point is the Biden administration is want to do everything possible to show that it is supportive of Israel. And you've already seen that today with Republicans arguing that the Biden administration let UN sanctions on Iranian missile programs expire. And, it's one thing I actually did agree with, my first time in a while, maybe ever, I've agreed with Matt Miller at the State Department, where he said it was nonsense. It likely is nonsense. They've put in tons of other sanctions this administration has on Iran, including on their weapons programs, their missile programs. But that's the talking point that will be used by the Republicans, that Joe Biden let the Iranians get the ballistic missiles that they use to attack Israel. So there'll be that political pressure on the Biden administration to make sure that they get seen as doing everything as possibly supportive of Israel. And certainly there's as we've talked about before, there's no end to the members of Congress who are willing to, drive off a cliff if Israel asks them to.
Some estimations show that Israel has spent something like $1 billion in one night to defend itself. We didn't count how the United States, United Kingdom, Jordan, and other countries spend on this defensive actions. You said $14 billion. It's going to be for 14 days they can defend themselves if something like this, if at the same scale, if they're not escalating the war in Israel, because it's nothing when it comes to this kind of warfare. We know we have this experience in Ukraine. We know when wars start, and you cannot say it can last more than a year, 2 years, 3 years. Nobody knows when it's going to end. This is the problem that we're facing right now. They are simplifying everything, and you don't understand what they're talking about right now. If they want to attack Iran and Iran attack them, and it will escalate drastically in a short period of time, and nobody can control it. And I don't know if Biden is ready to do that. It's going to be a suicide for his political campaign in the United States. Because at the end of the day, Matt, you remember when the war in Ukraine started, we didn't know who's going to support Russia, who's going to stay behind Russia. We saw that Iran was helping Russia. China was helping tremendously Russia. These are things that may happen during the conflict.
Right. First of all, what you just said there is the best analysis I've heard of what's occurring these last several days. That was absolutely wonderful. Thank you, Nima. In the sense of I completely agree. The madness that's here. But I've probably said this before, the first economics class I ever took, the professor comes in and he explains how economics is a science that involves rational decision making. And he says it's complete BS because human beings aren't rational. And so as we say that, as you said so well, okay, $14 billion, if they spent $1 billion in one night with air defense munitions, that's only 2 weeks worth of, right? And the more important aspect of that, it's not the money, it's the ability to produce these things. Now, I think what the Americans are able to do is the Americans are able to use more of their stores, more of their stockpiles, right? So the munitions and the aircraft that were used last night by the United States are come out of American stockpiles, if you will. Very obvious. That's a very obvious thing to say. But it's different in the sense that the Americans are claiming they're using it for their own self-defense, right? So whereas we have within our stockpiles a limit that we will not go below. So once we reach a certain point with any of our munitions, supposedly we will not send any more to Ukraine. And we believe that's been hit a number of times with different weapon systems and different munitions. With Israel, and particularly because of the large American presence in the Middle East there, that cap may not exist. So the Israelis may be able to get more support from the Americans. The important thing, though, too, is that the Israeli missile defense systems are not American missile defense systems. There's a relationship there with Iron Dome and everything, but their other systems, David Sling and others, those are not. It's not the same as where the Americans are sending Israel their 502,000-pound bombs. Right. So I have to expect or believe that the Israelis have a way or have thought of a way to manufacture these things in a surge manner, but maybe they haven't. Look, the Ukrainians supposedly decided not to dig more than 1 or 2 lines of defense. So, the things that you expect would happen very often don't happen. But this madness, as you describe, that, you put this down on paper, but so much of it is political calculation. So much of it is, particularly say with this government in Israel, this idea of, would this be a way to keep us in power? If Iranian missiles and drones are falling in on our cities, is this a way to keep us in power? There are also too, I think, within Israel, they've wanted this battle with Iran for a very long time. We've all seen Netanyahu going to the UN now for what, 3 decades standing on at the podium at the UN during the General Assembly and denouncing Iran and saying the world must come against Iran, and holding up his little sign, of course, with the little bomb saying, showing you how long until they get nuclear weapons. And of course, all the usual monsters and lunatics are out with this. So of course, John Bolton is all over the news as well, saying things that are completely untrue, and the cheerleading that's going on. So in the American press and among the American political class, you were hearing how much of a victory this is for Iran. Oh, they shot down 99% of Iranian drones and missiles. And so this can go on forever. And the problem is that you and I know that's nonsense. You folks watching, it's nonsense, because again, the Iranians gave 3 days notice. This was a demonstration. It was them saying, look how many we can throw away. We've got so many of these things, we can just waste them. And here's your warning. Are you going to heed it or not? And, but the way the Americans are talking about this, the Israelis are talking about this, the British are talking about this. The troubling thing is that when John Kirby says this, or Matt Miller says this, or whoever, when we repeat this obvious propaganda about how this shows how Israel clearly is dominant, that, et cetera, that propaganda doesn't turn off when they go into the conference room to make policy. And this is something that is very troubling and very disturbing, and should keep people awake at night. These people believe their own lies. And then those lies become the official truths that guide the making of policy. So as you're making policy, there are things that cannot be said, and there are things that must be adhered to. And one of those things now is that this was a complete Israel victory, that Iranian weapons are ineffective, that Israel can defend itself. All we have to do for success is just make sure Israel has enough missiles, and they'll be victorious, whatever victorious means to these people, right? And you and I know this is just insane. No, this is just nuts. And they're completely ignoring what the Iranians actually did, but they don't ever really care about what the other side did, because so much of this, again, is just based upon the narrative. So the narrative doesn't exist just for external communications purposes. The narrative exists to create policy as well. And so this is incredibly dangerous where we're at right now. And I agree. How can they look at this and say, this is a good idea to pursue, this is a good idea to escalate, and it is. I feel like I keep coming on, Nima, and saying the same thing. Like, this is a very dangerous situation, but unfortunately it is.
Right now, with these new escalations between Iran and Israel, we're going to have some sort of problems in the Strait of Hormuz that would be much more consequential than what we've seen so far in the Red Sea. And Iran is not Houthis. It's something totally different. This is hugely important for all of the countries all around the world. It's not just about a small group of people talking and fighting each other. And right. How do you see the importance of the Strait of Hormuz, what we are having right now in the Red Sea?
It is. This is a good follow-up to what we were just talking about, right? I mean, here's this. You didn't have to have gone to the Naval Academy to understand the situation with regards to the Straits of Hormuz and how Iran can close them. You don't have to be a graduate of a Harvard Business School to understand the importance of shutting down those trade lanes, right? Those sea lanes, how that would impact the world economy. I don't think anyone is walking around thinking the world economy is going to do well with an oil shock. And certainly, and this is where you really start to be like, what the heck are these people thinking? How is the Biden reelection campaign gonna do if gasoline is $5 a gallon in the U.S.? So you see this is just this is madness. I'm struggling to find the right words here, because it doesn't make much sense. But you could start to see now, though, when you factor that in, Israel then turns around to the U.S. and say, this is why you have to support us, because you have to help us finish this thing quick. This is why it cannot extend into this months-long tit for tat, really just campaign to get headlines and make our people back at home cheer because, we sent missiles into someone else's cities. So you start to worry about, okay, would the Israelis use this as leverage to try and get the United States, as well as, other Western countries, of, hey, look, the UK and the French were involved over the weekend as well. So do you have that then where it becomes, we have to end this? This thing cannot continue past, say, July or whatever the mark on the calendar would be for the reelection. This can't be the situation going into the conventions. Joe Biden's when he announces, assume, he's going to keep Kamala Harris. He already has, but you understand what I'm getting at. Like, we can't have this idea that, $5 gasoline is going to haunt this reelection campaign. Yeah, I mean, the lunacy of this, even on the political level, right? Let alone the fact that, okay, now you have to utilize the United States Navy to open up those straits. And you're telling me the Iranians haven't been preparing this for 40 years, right? I mean, the largest naval battle since World War II was what, 1987, 1988, between the U.S. Navy and the Iranians, right? I mean, like, so the idea that somehow in the last 35 years, the Iranians haven't been preparing for that second naval battle, right? And as well, too, is who comes in on Israel, on Iran's side. And I think that was such a great point you made a few moments ago when you spoke about that. When the Ukraine war started, when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, February 2022, the understanding of who was going to back Russia was far from clear. And so many people were surprised at the support that Russia received, right? I mean, many people, maybe they thought they saw it coming, but most people, I don't think, did, including most especially those in power in the West. They thought everyone was going to line up neatly and smartly behind us. But that's, again, because they believe their own propaganda, because any type of negative reporting, anything that runs contrary to that narrative, is not allowed on the boss's desk. So yeah, this type of thing. But how can, again, anyone look at this and say, this is a good idea, this will work out well? And I'll say that as well for the Iranians too. I mean, I think the Iranians have the opportunity to have won a political victory here by standing up to Israel, but there are strategic problems with this. One of them being it's taking attention away from Gaza, right? So if you are seeing a success strategically in the sense of Israel being isolated, losing Western support because of Gaza, this is not the way you go about keeping attention on Gaza and continuing that pressure. All right. It also makes it so that the West has an ability to unite behind Israel now. Yes, of course, we know what's happening in Gaza is terrible, but what's really important is the fact that Iran, the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, they'll fall back on all those tropes, right, is going to threaten the world's economy if we don't stand with Israel. So if you don't want $5 gallon gasoline, you have to line up and make sure that Israel is victorious against Iran. I mean, so there are strategic questions here that for Iran, just as there are for Israel. I don't believe that's as stark for Iran as for Israel, but they're certainly there.
Their strategy was so accurate in my view because they didn't kill anybody. They didn't want to enter in that game that we are witnessing right now in Gaza. I partially agree with you that this conflict between Iran and Israel would affect the attention that we are having right now in Gaza. And I think that is much more important than anything else right now. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, it seems that Iranian army and government consider all of this in this attack on Israel.
I think so. And it gets to the point of what option did Iran have? And the fact that they did such a big but limited attack, right? Because a big 320, 330 fleet of missiles and drones that was televised across the world. The entire world was watching this attack occur. The entire world knew 8 hours in advance that Iran's missiles and drones are going to land in Israel. So the entire world was watching this. Okay, at the same time, too, as broad as that was, as much of a spectacle as it was incredibly limited because they knew these things were going to get shot down, right? They knew that the targets that they were not going to have a lot of damage, and even where they shot the hypersonic missiles and those got through, those were on Israeli military bases that will never, maybe eventually in Haaretz. Some reporter will talk about what actually got hit there, but that's going to happen a week or two at best from now. I mean, so and you're not going to have the photos of it. In fact, the Israelis have video out today of just holes in the desert, basically, that they say where these missiles hit. I don't know if those are actual or not. I have no idea. But the idea, though, is that it was a limited attack done essentially as a warning. The same way that the Iranian foreign minister, suggested to the Gulf monarchies that you could be next. You host all these American bases, you could be next. These missiles could hit you as well. And you get into that type of nightmare scenario then of this thing escalating, and Iran doing exactly that. Particularly you get to the point where they fear an actual massive U.S., Israel, UK campaign of regime change through military action, and they also fear that they get in the mindset of use it or lose it. And so, okay, we need to use all our stuff now, otherwise we're going to lose it. And then you get into all these scenarios where, American air power is no longer in the skies because their bases have been hit by hypersonic missiles, which allows the American bases in Iraq and Syria to be overrun by the militias, by the armed groups, by the popular mobilization forces that are aligned with Iran, right? So you could have these cases of American bases in Iraq or Syria being destroyed, soldiers killed and taken prisoners because the air cover coming out of Saudi Arabia and UAE and other places has been cut off because of Iranian missile strikes. I mean, you could do this for a bunch of different branches and come up with different ideas of how this could go badly. So it is. This is the fact that the Iranians kept it as limited as possible. And then, as we said earlier, the incredibly important point was they said, we feel this concludes it. We feel this is done. We don't plan on doing anything else. And obviously, like as we were saying, they pursued everything. It took them 10 days to launch these attacks. Nothing happened in the UN. There were no attempts to. The Western press still won't even say Israel did the attack on the Iranian consulate in Damascus on April 1st. They still won't say it. They say Iran alleges that Israel attacked their consulate, right? So you can't even get the West to even acknowledge that Israel attacked. I mean, so that's where they're at. What are you going to do? So they do this very broad, this very high-profile, spectacular attack. The whole world sees it, but they also knew that it was only going to have a very limited effect, almost no effect, right? I mean, so in the same way too, I think you saw this after August. I'm sorry, in late December 2019, early January 2020, when the Trump administration killed General Soleimani in
Iraq.
In Iraq, thank you. And the Iranian response was to attack Al Assad Air Base, but to have given warning, as well as for to use older, as far as I remember, older ballistic missiles that I've been on Al Assad. I was there. Like half those missiles didn't even hit Al Assad proper, right? I mean, so they utilized weapon systems that weren't really much of a threat. They were older. They cleared out some inventory, I guess. They let us know this was going to happen. All our troops were in bunkers before the missiles struck, right? I mean, and then the Americans, thank God, just let it go, right? And that's the question. Are the Israelis going to let this go, or do they see that political advantage in continuing to ratchet this up? Again, one of the most important figures in that calculation is that they believe the Americans are going to support them.
And just to wrap up this session, you talk about the UN Security Council. Iran asked them to condemn this attack in Syria, but they didn't do anything. It seems that doesn't exist, because if they wanted to de-escalate this situation between Iran and Israel, they need to condemn what has happened in Syria. But they didn't do that. Right after Iran took the Israeli ship, they talk about, now this is against international law.
Right.
So
Right.
this double standards doesn't work. The people are getting this. We have seen this in Ukraine right now, in the Middle East, between Israel and Gaza. We have to stop thinking that everybody's stupid but us. People understand what's going on in each and every issue. That's why what we are talking about right now can get a lot of attention out there at YouTube or other alternative medias that we are having. We didn't have these things 10 years ago.
Right. And that's why they want to ban TikTok and everything, you know? I mean, like, um, the I guess there's a couple points there, right? The failure of what was attempted at the end of World War II to create an international order, an international structure that would be based upon international law. And many people, I guess, will say that was always folly. Power was never gonna give itself up. Power was never gonna cede, right? Certainly, a nation was never gonna fully give up its sovereignty in cooperation with others. And we've seen that. Yeah, I mean, the UN is by and large ineffective. And I'm a person who believes in it. I think this is for humanity to survive, let alone for us to prosper. But as for us to survive, we need that type of cooperation. You know, I very much agree with the title of your show, right? Dialogue works, you know, and that's the only way forward, particularly, over the last 75, 80 years in this nuclear age. And the understanding that people have. So the disbelief and the anger and the frustration and just the kind of the mocking that occurs when the United States says, we see Iran's attack on Israel as a clear violation of international law. When Israel says this is a clear violation of international law, I mean, the chutzpah of Israel to say anyone else is violating international law, but then that the Americans stand behind them. Americans say, we've reviewed this, and over the last 6 months, we don't see Israel breaking international law in Gaza, right? And so for people, as you said, who are watching this every day, who can see this every day, and I think that is something to see whether or not the American empire can continue on, or it's declining, but whether that decline will be quicker or not, I think will come down a lot to how they react to this information age that we're in, to the ability for people to learn about these things from programs like yours, the importance of of independent media. Like, I'm pretty certain I've said it before on your show, the fact that 55% of Americans are opposed to, as Gallup put it, Israel's military operation in Gaza, when the American corporate media and nearly the entire American political establishment are just regurgitating pro-Israel talking points all the time. The fact that 55% of Americans are against Israel, I mean, that's huge. And it shows the power of independent media, shows the power of alternative media, right? People are learning about these things and how the empire responds. And I think, of course, the way they're going to respond is the way they've shown their hands already, right? That they're going to try and carrot and stick approach with big tech, right? So that the board of directors and the top senior positions of those companies are going to be full of people coming out of the empire, right? So whether they're retired generals or secretaries of state or whoever are going to be on those boards, and their chief executive positions will be filled by people coming out of the CIA and DOD and NSA, et cetera. So they'll co-opt them, right? In the same way, too, you have capture the other way with corporations capturing government. So this big tech just becomes another one of the elite establishment groupings. Are they going to try and suppress, right? So, obviously talk a lot about Julian Assange, or work a lot with issues relating to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. And, what we see happen so very often is this intersection in the US of First Amendment and Fourth Amendment, and meaning basically the intersection of free speech and privacy, right? And how the government sees both of them as two sides of the same coin. And so it's just not good enough to censor free speech, but you also have to suppress. I'm sorry, you have to not just suppress free speech, but you also have to surveil, right? You have to eliminate privacy. It's not so much just the output, but even the process, even the thinking, right? Even the private communications, you have to make it sure people don't have that privacy, so that it just doesn't become an issue of like suppressing the actual outlets and the distribution, but by attacking privacy, removing any safeguards people have to be dissidents, right? To not go along with the official line, to oppose the empire, So it is. I mean, these things you see how all this comes back, and the fact that again, 55% of Americans are against Israel, is a really shocking thing. And I think it's how the empire responds to that will show whether the decline of the empire is gradual or whether it's going to be rather quite quick.